Report of the Chief Medical Officer on the outbreak of plague at Sydney, 1900.
Plague usually spreads to humans when somehow humans intrude on the natural reservoir of plague in animals. The fear, the hysteria and the human reaction that raged in Sydney in 1900 was in some ways the greatest episode of personal reaction that Australia's ever seen. John Ashburton Thompson was one of the great pioneers of public health in Australia, but he really came to fame when he became the head of the public health department.
The first patient was a carman who was regularly employed by the Central Wharf Co. A circular spot suggested that the infection had been communicated by a puncture.
He was a difficult man, apparently. He was terse with his colleagues, but highly respected for his achievement in public health and for his sort of epidemiological insights.
Case 2. The patient had been attacked about February the 17th. The inmate said that the deceased had removed 5 dead rats from a water closet.
Up until that point, there was a strong belief that disease was spread by a miasmic form, i.e. it was spread in the air, it was spread by unsanitary living conditions, it was spread by poor environmental conditions. Most of the medical profession had no idea of the actual mechanism of spread of plague. Ashburton Thompson did.
The popular notion regarding the bubonic plague is that it is dangerous to come within a stone's throw of a patient, but this is a mistake. The infection is conveyed from rats to man by the intermediary agency of fleas. There need be no panic. I know what the plague is, and I am not going to let it get a foothold in Sydney.
What we don't fully understand, I think, is how much fear is an emotional contagion, how it overwhelms anything that the medical profession might tell us. The media set the tone of the epidemic. Sydney newspapers were full of banner headlines. This is the scourge of the East. This is the Black Death revisited. They published the streets and the names of people who died from plague. Some people argue there's such a thing as plague fear, and the word plague, in fact, engenders extraordinary reactions in ordinary people.
Once more, the department publicly stated that epidemics of plague were not kept going by communication of the disease from person to person.
Well, one of the things Ashburton Thompson did was to try and encourage people to be inoculated against plague. They'd managed to get hold of a vaccine. There were violent scenes at the Board of Health where literally hundreds of people tried to break the door down to get in and get vaccinated.
A portion of the general public were determined to be inoculated at all hazards, though they stood in no known danger of contracting the disease. Very much of this first assignment consequently was wasted.
One of the problems with the management of epidemics is that governments always reach back into the past. Quarantine, cleansing, fumigation, isolation of patients, closing down parts of the city. The government employed thousands of people whose job it was simply to go through homes that have been vacated by cases, to whitewash every wall, to move incredible amounts of rubbish and waste from their backyards.
Case 84, attacked April the 5th. Case 85, attacked April the 5th. Case 101, attacked Case 150, 170, Case 107, April the 29th.
Problem is, particularly in a situation like plague, where nobody really understood even despite Ashburton-Thompson's widespread talk about how it was related to rat and flea. The bulk of the population had no idea.
We now have 4 cases in which infection positively was by fleas, which came off a diseased rat. It is not under control, and the cleansing, though excellent in its way, is not enough. The only thing really worth doing at this time is to kill the rats, instead of which we are doing nothing at all. Case 7, the last which need be here mentioned, occurred on March the 8th in a boy about 2 years old. In an outhouse in which the younger children used to play, 1 or 2 dead rats were discovered. The disinfecting staff found quite an extraordinary number of fleas. The bodies of the younger children were almost literally covered with their punctures. All but the youngest child recovered.
There's no doubt about it, the living conditions in the central part of Sydney were actually horrific. To Ashburton's credit, he managed to convince people, at least at the higher echelons of society, that perhaps rats had something to do with the infection.
Places in which rats live and breed are the dark and intricate recesses which exist about ill-constructed or decaying structures, where defective flooring is supported above the natural soil.
And a major campaign was instigated across the whole of Sydney, and there was a furnace set up to exterminate rats.
They're constantly found in butcher shops, produce stores, grocers' shops, and through doors left open at night.
The Balmain Council started to actually build major trenches and fill them with glucose to attract rats.
The department urged a crusade against rats and that a capitation fee be paid for every dead rat delivered by all except the members of a special rat-catching staff.
The rat campaign is said to have killed about 110,000 rats. Plague probably produced the first true realisation in Australia of the link between environmental living conditions and disease generally.
The recent epidemic consisted in the attack with plague of 303 persons between January the 19th and August the 9th, of whom 103 died.
His work recognising the link between the plague bacteria, the primary host, the rat, and the flea as a medium or vector of spreading it, was in many ways quite pioneering. Ashburton-Thompson was recognised then, and indeed now, overseas more than he was ever recognised in Australia. Now, why then did not plague become permanently entrenched in Australia? Arguably it could have. It's quite possible that plague could still exist as a natural disease of small ground-living animals.